This episode is brought to you by Baby Audio. What are you using on your mix bus?
In the box, that's 455. That's my plugin. That's based on my hardware sidechain. No, not sidechain, but sidecar, API sidecar. And then I have an AT101, which is a 670 compressor hardware that is outstanding. And it uses the real transformers and the real tubes of the real thing, not just a emulation of what they thought it could be. It's 100% right. And just using that line amp alone on the stereo is really, really great. The old Tube Tech multiband on the stereo, either through the soft tube in the box or hardware, is terrific. That 455 is great. And going back and plugging my new one, the 821 tape machine, it's great too on the stereo bus, because that one does something to low end that I've never heard done. And many, many people over the last week have just been like, how is this doing it? Because it takes a bass guitar and pulls it back behind the speakers. But it doesn't, it appears to be bass is getting fatter, but it's not adding low end. It's really interesting. So that's on my stereo. I do like the old ATR still a little bit. Not as much now that I've got my own tape plugin that works better for me, for my taste. It just depends. I still kind of mix out of the box sometimes, depending on if I feel like it for the day. I still like to kind of calibrate stuff and feel like a real engineer versus just using all, in the box. But I would say I'm definitely 50-50 these days. 50-50 in the box versus out, depending on the project. It's pretty cool. And I think that's kind of relatively, I don't like I like compressors. I have a lot of different compressors, but I don't like to use it aggressively. So let's say I'm using the SSL 2-Bus Plus. I like to use that with mix mode, maybe 40% on, and then put the sidechain on. So I'm not even touching the low end. So I'm just focusing on areas of the stereo image to just kind of clamp and just get down a little bit. Hydrating the track a little bit, meaning like trying to expand it, is dangerous. There's all these gimmicks that I feel that are in plugins and limiters that like you can get really in the weeds or ahead of your skis very quickly. So you got to be very cautious with that. I mean, I was just talking to Dave Pensato about this, and like he does not like to use bus compression, which you would think he would, as much as he uses it time to time, but like he's just like, I just don't like it. And the more I talk to around the town and stuff, people are getting away from that a little bit because we got so into using these things. But you do need to get the level up. So you have to find ways to make sure you can do that. I'm not anti it. And there's certainly guys that can do it. Like CLA is the best at what he does. And he uses so much compression. It's insane. But there's no one better for that style, in my opinion. He's so good at that. But I could never do that. Like my mind cannot operate like that. And I don't know how he does it. And I don't know how his brother does it. And these other great mixers that just, Spike Stent, another one that just loves to use a lot of aggressive compression. It's a sound. It's a taste thing. It's an energy thing for sure.
And all this processing you were talking about on your mix bus, do you start like when you start the mix, do you turn them right away on? I mean, do you turn them on right away, or maybe at I don't know, half of the process, or maybe later?
Yeah, my 455, I have like a setting I always kind of like to start with, and that is the 0.5 click on the EQ, 50 hertz on, 1 click up, 250 off, 1 click down, 10K up, 1 click up. And at 0.5, it basically subtracts times 2. So you're only doing a half dB. And either a 20 or 40 high pass, just to get some of the gunk out. And I will turn it off. And on that plugin, it has an option where it has a converter choice. So I can choose between Willie or Atticus, which is a Labrie or a JCF converter. They both have very own personality as a converter. The drums change, the stereo image change. But I'll start with it on the left. I'll start with the line amp on, and then I'll turn it off. We'll start the mix and keep going. And when I feel like it's starting to get really good, then it's like that reward. When you put it in, you're like, there it is. It just starts instantly setting it off. I know That's a thing that a lot of guys like to do because it's just like it's a little reward. You spend a little time, you get it to get sitting right, and you're like, this is sounding great. And then your mind thinks, how can I get it better? And then you put something in. Sometimes it doesn't work. Most of the time it does. But usually putting that in, you're expanding the low end in a proper way, phase wise, and bringing up the top proper way, phase wise, with unison of a lot of instruments, and clearing some of that low muddiness down at the below, 300 and above the bass stuff and the snare. And that's just a really good starting place. And if it's wrong or it doesn't feel right, I can switch over to the other converter, which is Atticus, which is the JCF. And what that does, it just shifts things a little different. It can make the vocal sit back a little bit because response of these converters, they just have their own personality. And usually between those two, I get a really good sweet spot. Really cool.
Nice. Is there anything you automate in your mix bus?
Not really. Maybe a little bit EQ. I've been playing with my 821 with automation, and I like the shelves and the bias. The bias is not necessarily an EQ. It's more like, I call it like a constipation knob, where like if you feel like the low is getting like just really tight and not great, you back that knob off a little bit and it just kind of opens it up without kind of shifting your EQ of your low end. So by automating that, it does seem to kind of be nice when the song gets a little busy. That's pretty cool.
My mix box is pretty static for probably the last 10 years, I would say. Might have been a little different at that time, but most of my sound's already happening by the time it gets to the mix bus. So basically what I'm doing, a little bit of my trick is mixing the drums extra loud into the mix bus and then having all the limiting and the compression on the mix bus itself. I found that works a little bit better. So I'd say my 0-point mix bus is these days, again, it was different then, but I'll have the Q3, the FabFilter Q3 on the stereo channel. And all I'm doing with that generally is I'm just rounding off some bottom, slicing off some top, even for stuff that I'm missing that I might not hear if I don't have the sub on. And then I have just if things start get a little out of control for 3K or 10K, I can kind of use a little bit of the EQ in that too. But again, really simple. I'm not doing a whole bunch of dynamic EQ or anything fancy like that if I don't have to. And then I put it through the Eddie Kramer Waves Pi compressor, which I had Eddie Kramer at my studio recently at the Hideout.
Cool.
And it was awesome. I mean, here's a guy use his little profile model of his Pi compressor. I've been using that thing for 20 years, and now the guy's in my studio in my chair, recording. So it was really cool. But that's been my mainstay forever. And again, it kind of acts a little bit like the SSL center compressor, but the rack mount version is. Do you know G384 or something like that? The little, it kind of works a little bit like that, where it just does something cool to the bottom end, gives the drums a little bit more attack. Almost don't hear it. I'm barely touching it. Honestly, the needle's going, just like that on all the drum hits, barely even going, but just enough to kind of give everything a little bit of point to it and round off the bottom end. Soften the top up a little bit too. And then typically I'll put that, after that, I'll put it through an inflator, the Sonics, inflator, which that one I'll adjust song by song, so there is a little bit of distortion or not distortion, well, saturation coming from that. So if it's a really aggressive song, I can kind of, give a little bit more stank to it, a little bit more compression without being just true limiting. And occasionally after that, I'll have more of a true faceless limiter as well, something that's not giving it really character as much as just, knocking off some of the transients just so it's a little cleaner. And going to go through, make an Apple Digital Music in those days, or even now, and ADM file a little bit tamer, and you're not, getting all the sample cuts off and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty much the bass thing. Occasionally I'll put in one of those Brainworks mid-side EQs, which I don't do a lot of fancy stuff with that for the mid-side stuff. Occasionally I will if there's hats on one side versus the other side or something like that, and it's knocking off my head and I don't want to change my mix. But most of the time I can change my mix to accommodate stuff. But I usually use that V3 for one of my EDM friends, showed that little trick to me of monoize in the bottom end. So I'll make mono from maybe, 100 hertz down or 125 hertz down. I'll turn that into mono signal if it's sounding right. Just kind of focuses the bottom end a little bit better. And again, give me just a little bit of an option if I need to tame some transients or some top end, stuff. And seems like there's a lot, but that's really pretty basic. A little EQ, a little general compression, and by general I mean like hardly anything. A little more limiting because again I'm mixing the drums extra hot, and that's it.
So, what are you using on your mix bus?
Hardware-wise, it's right in front of me. You can see it right now. If I go with hardware, I have a Studio DMI EQ, which is an EQ that there's only a few builds, I think, at the moment in the world. That is a very nice, very musical mid-side EQ. And I use normally Dangerous compressor if I want to go for, I would say, vibe, but with respect of the groove of the song. And then if I want to add movement and groove, I combine a little bit of the Dangerous compressor for consistency, so keep things under control. And I do an SSLG for groove. Sometimes I actually put an SSLG on my drum bass. Those are the three pieces that are always there. And then, based on the song, is the black box hardware that's right here on the right side. This sometimes goes on the stereo bus, sometimes goes on the drum bus. With my patch, I just ran from one on the other one. That's kind of my go-to, from the stereo bus. As far as my plugins, it's a combination of the Diamond Color EQ from Studio DMI Acustica for simple air on the top, a nice 40 hertz or 60 hertz little bump, those two parts. And I'm doing my techniques that I'm working with these techniques now for many years, which is mid-range compression, which is I'm using the Pro C to kind of lift the mid-range with compression on the mid. And then those, I think, they're the two things that are kind of like non-negotiable. So if I'm in the box, I have the Color EQ and the Pro C. If I'm on analog domain, I have my hardware. But then I try to limit myself to like few tools and stick with those, just also to retain my sounds, my workflow, and I think it's important. And then once in a while, I just bring new instrument or do test new gear or new plugins. But try to stay consistent instead of like bring new plugins every time, every songs, and just lose my sound.
Is there any element on your mix bus that you automate?
I do. I would say not on the mix bus on the early stage of mixing. It's more like on the late stage of mixing, it's sides. So if I do mid-side EQ or I use space control later on just to enhance certain parts, I like to do automation like close the sides a little bit on end of the verses, open up on the chorus, or I do VCA automation if I'm using a lot of compression on the chorus, I want to back off on the entire verses and bridges, then I use the VCA on Studio One to just like pull the fader down a little bit and essentially push less compression. So those, the type of automation that I like to do on the stereo bus normally.
And do you ever use parallel processing on your mix bus?
I do not on a mix bus. Okay. I do on the drum bus frequently, hardware or in the box, not on a stereo bus, no.
So I start out analog. So I have a summing mixer, Rupert Neve Orbit, and then I go to an SSL Fusion. I use very little of that. I mostly use the stereo width and sometimes the transformer and sometimes the low filter if it's a really sub-heavy song. And then I get back into the box to print the file, and then I have a few plugins. Ozone 11 is a favorite of mine. The ML 4000 by Mick DSP has a great compressor. Let's see what else. Oxford Inflator, Gold Clip by Schwab Digital, Limitless by DMG, and I don't use all these. It just depends on the song. You know, some of them will have 2 or 3, and then the next song will have 5, and you know, just depends on the song. And then probably my recent favorites are, the Hazelrig VLC plugin, EQ preamp. I put that on my stereo bus for really low and really high frequency boosts. Let's think if there's anything else. I sometimes will use Isotope Match EQ just to compare my mix to other well-known songs and see where my frequencies lay and, you know, how balanced they are. So.
And when you start the mix, do you turn all those processes right away, or do you add them gradually?
No, I would say probably once I get the meat and potatoes of the song going, like the rhythm section, drums, bass, whatever the main keyboard guitar element is, and then maybe the lead vocal. Once I have that, then I'll start with the stereo bus, and I'll probably get about half of it turned on, and then the last limiter, probably an hour into the mix, I'll finally have the whole stereo bus turned on.
Have you tried Baby Audio's plugins? They're designed to inspire creativity and enhance your music production experience. From their Crystalline River plugin, offering ultra-clean reflex free of metallic artifacts, to Spaced Out, a hybrid reverb and delay workstation that combines over 50 individual effects. Baby Audio provides tools that can transform your sound. Right now you can get an exclusive discount on all their plugins. Just use the code AGARTHA15 at checkout. Don't miss out. Click the link in the description and elevate your music today.
So what plugins or gear do you use, and what does each element bring to the mix?
Well, my mix bus stuff kind of changes often also, depending on the project and what it kind of calls for, but there are certain things that I use a lot. These days, I usually have, for rock things, I'll have an SSL compressor, and even in pop things, I'll have an SSL compressor. Sometimes I'll have an API 2500. I'll usually have some kind of harmonics kind of thing, where there's a plugin called Harmonics that I really like. This is like a tape saturation plugin that's usually on there, along with there's a plugin called the Oven that I like, that is really good, and that's just kind of tonal shaping, but in a very pleasing way. And then there'll be a multi-band compressor in there, but you know, I won't have it on to start with. That's usually I'll pop that in at a point, or I won't at all if I feel like I want it to sound more polished. Usually, you know, because I find that as soon as you put multi-band compression on things, it tames it all very much, which results in a kind of polished sound. And that can be good sometimes, and it can not be good sometimes.
And when you're using the compressor, how much do you compress?
On the mix bus?
On the mix bus, yeah.
Depends. It's to taste. Sometimes a lot. Sometimes it might be hitting 6-8 dB, you know, and just getting cranked. And then sometimes it's just barely touching it. So,
yeah, and what?
No real.
So, what time of not time? Sometimes I lose my English. I hate that.
Oh, that's okay. No
what step of the process do you turn on the compressor?
Which, the mix bus compressor?
Mix bus compressor, yeah.
Pretty early, if not immediately. Depends. Yeah, most of the time it's on there early. If not from the very beginning. Yeah.
And what are you using on your mix bus?
Oh, you know what? I have to open up something and tell you. Here. So on my mix bus, here, hold on a second. It's going to open up. Yeah. I tend to. There's a guy that came to me one day and he wanted me to listen to his mix, and I opened up his session, and he had subgroups of subgroups, and on every subgroup and on every channel he had as many plugins as you could put in. And I hit play, and the mix was like it was like I went, oh my god. And I said, hold on, and I saved as, and I took everything off. I took off every single plugin and hit play, and he went, that sounds really good. And if you look at all of the insane mixers, Mike Fraser, Randy Staub, who did the Black Album. Mike Fraser has done the last 6 AC/DC records. Andy Wallace, Chris Shaw, Dave Schiffman. When they mix on a analog console, they really only have one EQ, and they maybe have a compressor. And what seems to be happening is because we have so many options, and we have all of these companies selling us this plugin, this plugin, this plugin, this plugin, this plugin, this plugin is going to fix your world. Every amazing record was done with actually minimal gear, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like. It's kind of sad, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so on my mixing bus, stereo bus, where is it? Here it is. I have a SSL G-Series bus compressor. And then after that, I have an EQP1A Pultec. I have this thing called the linear phase multiband on it. And then I have the ProLogic 2. The L2, yeah, and that's my mix bus, and that kind of gives it enough pump and size and G level.
What am I not using on my mix bus is more like it. I use a bunch of different plugins, but in sparing amounts. So it's not like I'll use the SSL compressor, the UAD SSL compressor, but it's got a mix feature on it. So I don't use it 100%. I might use it at like 40%. And I'll use, there's a company called Leapwing that makes, it's called the Dyne 01. And it's a really nice kind of multi-band limiter plugin that just sounds great, and I'll use that as well. And it has a gain makeup, or you can turn the gain makeup off, and sometimes that gain makeup really kind of makes a mix like shine, like push through, and sometimes it's just a little too much. So I'll go between having the gain in and off, depending on the what I'm looking to get out of it, and then I'll run a Pultec plugin a lot of times. Like I said, the tape plugin, the A800 plugin, I like on stereo bus. The Schwab Gold Clip is a great kind of finishing plugin, just to kind of keep you honest, keep the peaks out. And there's other stuff that I'll swap in and out, just kind of like looking for, if I'm just looking to kind of tweak the whole mix in a certain way, and nothing like Fab Filter EQ is also great if you're just looking to extract like a little mud, or, a little 9K or something, just to get rid of, sibilance, or, that tinny top end sometimes. So, it's really program dependent. So there's not really a static thing I use for my mix bus.
And what step of the process are you turning on all the that process at the beginning or as you go?
Kind of as I go, I usually start with like the SSL compressor in, at a pretty fast attack and release, just to kind of get a little like punch and excitement out of the bus. And maybe maybe I'll have that in, and I'll have the Pultec EQ, and I'll kind of start balancing from there. And as I get a bit further along, and the mix kind of starts to take shape, then I might throw the gold clip on just to kind of maintain my levels, just make sure I'm not punching over too hard. And then and then kind of as I go, I'll start to add the other stuff to see if it helps or hurts.
Do you usually automate some of those plugins?
On the bus, not a whole lot. They're usually pretty static, but like I said, I use each one of them pretty sparingly. It's like and the other thing I will do a lot is I'll move them around in order, because sometimes the order really makes a huge difference, just in terms of what it does to your bottom end or how it might open up your imaging, so it's worth it just to kind of play around with that and see how it affects, what you're sending it,